All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Welcome to our academic lecture on TEMA 37, the English passive voice. If you're preparing for your EOI Oppositiones, or you just really want to master the deep mechanics and pragmatic uses of high-level grammar, well, you're in exactly the right place. Let's get started. Here is our syllabus for today's session. We're going to cover 6 main areas: introduction to thematic systems, formation and shifts, pragmatics and uses, complex structures, the passive gradient, and we'll wrap up with EOI pedagogical implications. We are moving logically from foundational linguistic theories all the way down to practical classroom applications. Starting off with Section 1, Introduction to Thematic Systems, focusing on information packaging. To really get this, we need to completely reframe how we look at sentence structure. To frame our core thesis, we have to look at Rodney Huddleston's work from 1984. He brilliantly pointed out that the passive voice isn't just some mathematical grammar flip. It's not just moving X to Y. Instead, it's a highly sophisticated thematic system used for information packaging. By actively shifting the affected person or thing into the subject position, the speaker deliberately refocuses the entire communicative weight of the sentence. So it's fundamentally about emphasis and pragmatic intent, rather than just mechanically rearranging words on a page. That brings us to Section 2, Formation and Shifts, specifically looking at syntactic transformations. Let's see how this actually builds, starting right at the verb phrase and clause levels. While the basic formula is relatively simple, just the auxiliary be plus the past participle, there are some really fascinating morphosyntactic constraints at play. The passive definitely retains all the underlying active tense rules, but as native speakers, we naturally avoid awkward, phonetically clustered structures. For instance, if you try putting a future or perfect progressive into the passive, you get these heavily stacked forms with be being or been being. While a sentence like they have been being watched is theoretically possible within the strict rules of grammar, let's be real, it sounds incredibly clunky and you'll almost never hear it in both written and spoken English. Now, at the clause level, we can cleanly track this transformation in 3 steps. First, the active object is officially promoted to the grammatical subject. Second, the active subject is demoted to become the agent, typically following the preposition by. And step 3 is absolutely crucial to understand. The introduction of that agentive phrase is completely optional. That single feature unlocks massive pragmatic flexibility. But we do have to be incredibly careful here, because shifting to the passive can actually change the nuanced truth value of a sentence, especially when quantifiers are involved. Take a look at this comparison. Every schoolboy knows one joke at least simply means every boy knows a joke, right? Not necessarily the same one. But its passive counterpart, one joke at least is known by every schoolboy, strongly implies there is one specific joke that every single boy happens to know. It's a subtle but honestly massive shift in meaning just from changing the voice. So, moving into Section 3, Pragmatics and Uses, focusing on communicative goals. Why do we actually bother using this structure in the real world? Well, this perfectly demonstrates how the passive allows us to maintain subject consistency, which dramatically improves a text's flow. In that first awkward version, jumping from the Prime Minister as the subject suddenly over to reporters as the new subject, it feels disjointed, it's jarring. The improved passive version allows the Prime Minister to comfortably remain the central subject of the entire thought, creating beautiful, seamless cohesion. It's also an absolutely perfect tool for establishing formal, objective distance in business, academic, and scientific contexts. And here's a rather striking statistic for you. A massive 80% of English passives omit the agent entirely. 80%! Why is it so high? Simply because the agent is either completely unknown, completely irrelevant to the current context, or obviously redundant. If we say Jack was beaten, and we already know he was in a boxing match with Michael, we really don't need to add by Michael. The focus is purely on what happened to Jack. The who is already a given. But when we do use an auxiliary to form the passive, we have a choice. And that choice deeply matters, especially for your C1 and C2 students. Choosing between be and get shifts the register entirely. Be is formal and totally neutral. Get, on the other hand, introduces an informal, conversational tone that focuses heavily on the consequences for the subject. Plus, it frequently carries an unfavorable attitude. Just notice the distinct difference between the objective, neutral educational event, he was taught a lesson, and the punitive, highly informal, he got taught a lesson. That second one usually implies someone is walking away with a severely bruised ego. Furthermore, we've got to carefully distinguish between the doer and the instrument when selecting our prepositions for the agentive phrase. We use by for the true doer of the action, whether that doer is animate or inanimate. For example, he was killed by a heavy stone implies an accident. The stone simply fell on him. But we use with for an instrument wielded by an unnamed agent. So, he was killed with a heavy stone means someone deliberately used the stone as a weapon. Completely different scenario. Now let's push into Section 4, Complex Structures. We're going to explore some of the more complex university-level structural edge cases and constraints. Let's talk about ditransitive verbs. Those are verbs that take two objects, like give, send, show, or lend. Because there are two objects, there are inherently two possible passive constructions. English strongly prefers the indirect passive, which promotes the personal recipient to the subject position. Why? Because English naturally prefers personal subjects over inanimate ones. This gives us, her sister was given the car. The direct passive, which makes the object the subject, is the car was given to her sister. And as a fun little regional variation, American English sometimes omits the two entirely, creating sentences like, the car was given her sister. I noticed this rather specific syntactic quirk regarding infinitives. Active verbs of perception or coercion that take a bare infinitive, like hear, see, or make, actually require a to infinitive when shifted into the passive. You do not say, he was made tell everything, you say he was made to tell everything. Interestingly enough, the verb let stands as a unique, tricky exception here. You can technically say he was let go with a bare infinitive, though native speakers usually bypass the awkwardness altogether by swapping the verb entirely for allowed. It's also deeply vital to recognize that not everything can be transformed. The passive has strict syntactic boundaries. Middle verbs expressing state or possession, like have, lack, or fit, strictly resist the passive. You absolutely cannot say, a nice house is had by them. It just sounds entirely wrong. However, stative verbs expressing attitude, like want or love, accept it easily, like he is wanted. And with prepositional verbs, it depends completely on abstraction. You can say the problem was gone into, because it's a figurative phrasal verb, but you definitely cannot say the tunnel was gone into. This inherent resistance to simple transformation leads us perfectly into Section 5, the passive gradient, which is based on the groundbreaking theories of Quirk and his colleagues. In their comprehensive 1984 grammar, Quirk and his team established that passiveness exists on a distinct gradient. This fundamentally changes how we classify these structures in advanced linguistics. It's not a simple binary switch where a sentence is magically either purely active or purely passive. Instead, it operates on a vast spectrum of grammatical behavior. That gradient systematically breaks down into three distinct levels. First, we have central passives. These have a direct, undeniable active transformation, like this violin was made by my father. Second, moving along the spectrum, we find semi-passives. These blend verbal actions with adjectival states. Because of this, you can actually modify them exactly like adjectives, saying things like, we feel quite encouraged. And finally, at the far end, we have pseudo-passives. These use the be auxiliary plus a participle, but have no real active counterpart, referring instead to a resulting state, like the building is already demolished. So, bringing all this theory together, we arrive at Section 6, EOI, Pedagogical Implications and Teaching Advanced Nuances. How do we effectively take this high-level linguistic theory into the advanced English classroom? Well, as pedagogical experts Celsi Murcia and Larson Freeman strongly suggest, treating the passive as a mere mechanical math equation creates unnatural, grotesque curiosities. I mean, what a great phrase, right? If we just hand students a worksheet of active sentences and arbitrarily tell them to flip the subject and object, we're doing them a profound disservice. We end up generating English that no native speaker would ever actually use. Instead, for your C1 and C2 learners, your teaching must focus heavily on register awareness. You need to show them exactly how the passive dominates academic, legal, and formal texts to maintain crucial objectivity. Emphasize the pragmatic intent, guiding these advanced students on why they should deliberately choose the passive to highlight a recipient or a specific result. Teach them to skillfully navigate those subtle attitudinal differences between be and get that we talked about earlier. I'll leave you with this question to ponder as you prepare your lesson plans. As future EOI educators, how will you move your students beyond basic mechanical transformations to achieve true pragmatic proficiency? If the passive voice is really about the strategic packaging of information, the real question is, what exactly are you teaching your students to hide? Until next time, keep questioning the mechanics.